Hello everybody, this is Graeme, and today I'm going to be looking at Sagrada Artisans with this nice kind of iridescent box. Now this is a legacy version of Sagrada, but if you've never played the base Sagrada before, that's not a problem, as this legacy is a completely standalone game. Now I do enjoy the original Sagrada. I like the theme, what it is, and the idea of drafting dice and placement rules, so I was definitely looking forward to seeing what the legacy version is going to bring to the gameplay. Now Sagrada Legacy starts off pretty straightforward. If you play the original version, you're going to be able to get into this very quickly. Even if you haven't, the rules teach is pretty nice and quick. There are different colored dice which are drawn from the bag based on the player count. Each player will draft a die and place the number and color on their board. Each drafted die must be placed adjacent to an existing die, but no two spaces can have the same color or number as a die that shares an edge. Now I must admit, I went into this game maybe a little worried. I like Sagrada, but I wasn't sure whether I want to play this back to back to back to get the most out of this legacy experience. Because honestly, I still have a few legacy games kicking around in my game room that are only half done. So, will this keep me wanting to come back for more to admire its elegance, or will it just be like a plain and boring, like a simple pane of glass? Let's get it to the table to see how it's played, and a heads up, I've tried not to spoil anything during the overview, but there are some very minor spoilers in the last minutes of the overview, so if you want to know nothing about the gameplay at all, you can use the timestamps to jump right to my final thoughts. And with that, let's get it to the table. So here's Sagrada Artisans. I am showing you almost everything for the initial game here, and since I don't want to spoil anything, I have removed the central board, the cathedral board, where you're going to be putting dice when they're drafted. But I do want to warn you that during the scoring section, I will be going through very minor spoilers. Now each player receives a journal, which will be theirs for the entire campaign. You write a family name on the first page so you can keep track of whose journal is whose. The colored pencils on the cathedral board, again it's this cathedral board which I'm not showing here, are placed in the middle of the table. The starting player receives a pencil sharpener. Open up the story box and only remove the cards that are labeled with the number that corresponds to the first window. Shuffle the private objective cards and give each player one face down. Then you read the intro card from this set. Then all players turn to the first window and read the introduction there. For the main gameplay, put all the dice into the bag, and the start player draws dice equal to the number of players plus 1. Since this is a 2-player game setup, that means we draw 5 dice. Roll them and place them on the main board. For this overview again, we don't have that main board, so I'm just going to place them in the middle of the table. If there are any duplicates, re-roll them until there are no duplicates within the dice. Now starting with the first player, we're going to be drafting the dice in a snake draft format. That is, each player will draft 1 die, starting with the first player. Then starting with the last player and going in reverse order, they're going to be drafting their second die. So the first player will draft first and last. Now when you draft a die, you have to fill in a space in your current window. You write the number in black and color in the space with the colored pencil that matches the die you just drafted. Now there are, of course, placement restrictions. Your first space can be anywhere within that window, but starting with the second space onward, it must be adjacent to an existing color and space. Now adjacency is sharing an edge or a corner. You may never fill in a space with the same number or color as a space that shares an edge. Some spaces have pre-printed colors or numbers and must be filled in with a die that matches those conditions. Now that is the basics of drafting a die and filling in the space. And there are going to be some starred spaces on your board. When you fill these in, you're going to refer to the objectives and the rules within the window that tell you what to do with those stars. Now, if you found you've ever broken any of the placement rules, then you must X out that space on your window. This is considered broken glass. That space now does not restrict its adjacent spaces, but it will not count towards any public scoring and is worth -1 points during the scoring phase. The only other thing that is available during the first game are tools. These are listed along the bottom of the current window. You can use one tool during your turn if it's still available. When you use a tool, apply the effect and cross off the tool point score above the tool. Some tools can be used multiple times. If you don't use a tool, you'll score the points as listed in the non-crossed off tool point spaces. Now the round continues until each player has drafted 2 dice. Then the first player marker moves to the next player, who restarts the round by putting all the dice back in the bag and drawing more. At the end of 12 rounds, the game is over. You read the outro story card from the main deck and follow any actions in order. It might unlock envelopes, boxes, or other things. There are some unlocks that also happen during the round or end of game if specific conditions are met. Each player then scores. Each player records the number of points they receive from the public objectives as printed in their journal, then score your private objective card. Add the tool point spaces that were not crossed out, then subtract the number of broken windows. Players receive rewards based on the player count and which game you're playing. They might receive legacy points, which you'll cross off on the back of your journal. You might collect some coins, which can be used to buy certain things, or you might receive tool cards. Any players receiving tool cards it's going to be the player in last place that gets one tool card from the tool cards available for the current window tool cards. Any remaining tool cards left are placed back into the market. Any coins that you've earned must be spent to either purchase additional tool cards, expand your toolbox, or use them to advance on some tracks which can give you benefit. Unspent coins do not carry over to subsequent games. When everyone is done scoring this phase, you can name your just completed window and place all the story cards and private objective cards from this round at the back of the main deck. You're not going to be needing these again. Now, since this is a legacy game, I've gone over just the pure basics of the game. During the campaign, you'll be opening up envelopes and boxes, adding new rules, opening up sections of the journal, and more. But I don't want to spoil anything, so that's it for now. Let's get back to see what I thought about Sagrada Artisans. So this is going to be a little different final thoughts. I'll try not to spoil anything about the legacy aspect of the game, but I'm going to be talking about generalities, and I will be talking a bit about that very first game. So for theme and components. The theme in this one is pretty shallow. It tells a story throughout the different ages, but there's really not much of a story. If you're looking for his legacy game with lots of twists and turns through an interesting story where the plot decisions matter, this is not it. For me, this is not really a negative, but if you like the original Sagrada theme like I do, then it's here. The main theme, though, is carried throughout the legacy story and does make thematic sense. There are some interesting thematic elements to the game, which I did appreciate as well. As a quick example, in the tools used for that very first game that I showed through the overview, those tools are actually used for stained glass work. So little things like that were fun to see. So on to the components. They're pretty good. The card quality is good. I like their journals. They held up very well through the campaign, but I do have a few minor negatives. First is the colored pencil choices, and one in particular, the purple. It really doesn't look anything like the purple pre-printed color in the book. Now, hopefully this comes across on camera, but that there is the pencil crayon, and that one there is the pre-printed purple. Now, the red looks different as well, but we didn't have that much of a problem as it did with purple. The other minor criticism I had was with the rules. Sometimes you're just left trying to interpret what you were supposed to do. A non-spoiler example, again, going back to the first game, it tells you to take out all the cards, read the intro, and pass out the private objectives and start. Well, you also get a set of tool cards with a 1 on them. So they're there for the first game, so what do you do with them? In the end of game scoring, it says they can be claimed by the players depending on how well they did, etc., like I went through in the overview, but it would have been nice for the initial setup to say, put those tool cards aside. There were some other edge cases we ran into that we weren't exactly sure what to do, but it all ended up working out. So on to the gameplay. It's pretty straightforward, basic mechanism. Draft a die, place it in your window following the placement rules. And I just find that enjoyable. I liked base Sagrada, and they really did a good job of not messing with that formula in the legacy version. Of course, being a legacy game, there's going to be more and more rules and options on your turn to how you want to handle the draft. But those fundamentals don't change, and I appreciated that. Now you might be thinking, doesn't that make the game get a little stale after a while? And I'm happy to say that what they added to the gameplay is, again, nothing overly complex in concept, but it opens up a huge decision tree as the game goes on. Needless to say, there's going to be more abilities, more ways to score, more ways to modify your drafted dice. But I liked it was a gradual increase, because at the end of the campaign, the turns ended up being very, very long. And because of that, I'm glad I only played this with 2 players all the way through. I think with the full complement of 4 players, by the end of the campaign, the length of turns really starts to drag out. My suggestion, maybe 3 players is the best because the end of game scoring, but still, I enjoyed my play at the 2-player campaign that I did. I also appreciate that at almost every game you were doing something a little different. There were new things added at the end of almost every game. It kept me wanting to play, let's just play one more game to use what we just got and see what the next thing was. The things that were added were kind of added to the previous editions, so it started to grow. And this is another thing that I really enjoyed about the game, but I'm not sure all Sagrada players are going to like this. If you enjoyed Sagrada and the simplicity, this added complexity may not be something you're looking for, but for me, it really worked well. Now, one thing I always wonder about in legacy games is, can you continue to play after the end of the story? And although you finished your journal through the campaign, the game does come with a whole stack of windows you can use with the things you revealed during the campaign. There are 4 copies of each window in this stack, so you can just play through those and after the campaign, and you can play them in any order. Now, you can't replay or restart the campaign as is because of the legacy aspect of the game, but you can continue to play with the new rule set after the end. So would I recommend this game? I really would, especially if you're a Sagrada fan, or if you've never played Sagrada before. This kind of introduces that gameplay in a very accessible manner. I enjoyed the legacy aspect of the game. I loved finding out the new things that were going to be added to the gameplay from game to game. I enjoyed the way the decision tree and how to manipulate my dice grew and grew as the game went on. I thought the game length was very good. It was short enough so you could play multiple games in a day, and one day we played 3 or 4 games kind of back to back. But it was long enough to really get your mind going over the puzzle of the new window. I also liked the gradual ramp of complexity in the game. By the last few games, there were a lot of things to be thinking about with every drafted die. And I guess one of the fundamental elements for me is I just like the main mechanism of the game. Drafting die to fill in squares with placement restrictions is just something that appeals to me. For some of the negatives I had, I thought they could have done a better job of matching the color of the pencils to the pre-colored squares. I felt the rules could have been a little clearer, especially for your first game or two. And I also did find the campaign maybe a little on the short side. I wish there were just a few more windows to go through. I also found the legacy story was very much on the thin side. Now, I'm fine with not reading pages of text before and after every game, but in this one you usually only got a sentence or two for the story. And there were 1 or 2 legacy aspects that I felt were interesting early on, but found by the end maybe they had outstayed their usefulness. But overall, I'm going to give this game an 8.5 out of 10 in the Dice Tower Seal of Excellence. When we had finished that campaign, we wanted to replay it all the way from the beginning again. And that, I think, is pretty high praise for a game I thought never really needed a legacy version. But that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.